Well, the Motlanthe report investigated post-election violence in Zimbabwe, and that report is out. The report says that the use of live ammunition was unjustified. It says that while the deployment of troops was justified as the MDC was inciting violence, the operational framework was not followed. Former President Kgalema Motlanthe's Commission of Inquiry into Post-Election Violence has apportioned blame to the opposition, but says the army's use of live ammunition was unjustified. 6 people were killed and 35 people injured when the army opened on opposition protesters on August the 1st, a day after the country's harmonized elections. The commission recommends compensation for the victims. Now, for more on the story, we are joined by SABC Foreign Editor Sophie Mokoena. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let's get perhaps a broader look and just talk about what the report actually says. We did note some parts of it, of course, compensation coming to the fore as well. But what other elements were in that report?
I think the report is clear that the protests were pre-planned because they didn't just happen in Harare, but it looks like in some parts of the country there were similar protests. Secondly, it indicates that they cannot rule out the use of weapons that were not from the army. In other words, suspecting that the protesters themselves were armed. And then the most important issue is that it has indicated that the use of the live ammunition was not justified. However, it indicates that the deployment of troops was justified because it was in line with the laws of Zimbabwe.
Sure. Sophie, you were on the ground. You were there during this election process as well, and there during the protests as they happened. Does your experience as well match up to what is being said in the report? And do detail your experience for us again.
Yes, I was there. I mean, when it started, when those protesters were advancing, towards the electoral results center, I was there. I was coordinating the coverage. I remember I had to speak to the team to say, this is going to get ugly, you must be careful. Then I allowed Griselda Lewis and Thabiso Rapakwana to go. The area where the shooting took place. But I also had people in the vicinity of the electoral results center, and Peter Ndoro was there. And I remember very well, at some point in time, we got an indication that the Zimbabwean officials were very angry that many of us were doing live crossings there. And they were indicating that according to the laws...
during the protest?
Yes, during the protest. Yeah. According to the laws of Zimbabwe, you are being classified as participating in the protest when we are covering that. And I remember many journalists leaving, and thereafter there was intimidation. And I remember Thabiso Rapakwana, the camera person, was threatened by the soldiers. And I said to them, guys, go back to the hotel and do your story. I sent another camera to take visuals, and we were quick to send the visuals because we had a DSNG van there. So it was a very, very volatile situation.
And your safety, obviously.
Yes, it was. But as a leader, you have to be there, and you cannot retreat.
Sure.
You are the last line of defense. You must ensure that there's visuals, there's story, there's information. And what I also observed was that indeed this thing was pre-planned. And unfortunately, in terms of the marshals, as we know in South Africa, when there are protests, you have organized marshals, you have people who are managing the whole process. There was no leadership.
If we continue with that leadership story, however, the legitimacy of this report and of the panel which put together this report was always questioned from the onset. Now, having culminated in the responses we've gotten in the report that we have now, do you think the legitimacy of it will still be tested? Will it continue to be something that they question?
Politicians are politicians. The fact that the report indicate that this was pre-planned by who? And those people must take responsibility also. Secondly, the soldiers themselves, they will have to indicate why they didn't follow the framework. But what I observed as an ordinary editor who was in charge on the day, I realized that in terms of deployment, the police were overwhelmed. But the problem is they know very well that Harare is the stronghold of the opposition. And that election was very, very tense. Why? You didn't plan properly in terms of deployment. Because if there was a proper deployment in terms of police, I don't think there would have been a need for the army to be called in. Because when you evoke or bring in the army, the only thing they know is to fire and fire bullets, and live ammunition is used. Therefore, when you bring them in, you must know the risk. It's not a smaller thing.
Affair,
it's a
which is exactly
affair.
why when we bring it home, anytime people have asked for the army to be deployed to any sort of protest, we almost hold back and say, wait, but hold on, that is huge. That is a big problem. Do you think political parties and Zimbabweans will accept this report?
I think ZANU-PF will, but I doubt whether the opposition will outright accept the report. But the problem is, the evidence is there. And like I'm saying, I was there. Both sides erred. And then also the credibility of a person like the former President Kgalema Motlanthe. When I saw that Kgalema Motlanthe was going to lead that commission, I said to myself, this is not going to be a wishy-washy report. There's no way Motlanthe would have done that. Even though there were people within the commission, people were questioning their credibility. But I had full confidence that Motlanthe was going to make sure that he does deliver a fair and a balanced report. But secondly, you had the former Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Chief Emeka Anyawuku, and people who know Chief Emeka Anyawuku. We've worked with Chief Emeka Anyawuku when I was still a political reporter, covering the Commonwealth. He's a very, very firm and
how important was it
strong.
That it wasn't done or wasn't led by somebody from Zimbabwe? Because there's a sense that it could have been biased from that.
I think the intention was to ensure that you don't have a situation where you say this person was biased. Because Zimbabweans are divided in the middle. When you speak to one Zimbabwean, don't think that's the real position. The other one might come up with a different version. And I think Nangwaga was trying to ensure that there's credibility in the process. But for me now the question is he going to implement the recommendations? For example, will people be called to account? Secondly, the compensation. Is government going to compensate the victims?
That's going to be a very good question to respond to and hopefully look at very soon. Ma'am Sophie, thank you so much for your time. Foreign Desk Editor Sophie Mokoena there joining us as we talk about that Motlanthe report on the fightings and the happenings out in Zimbabwe when they had their elections, of course.